Kia ora koutou, nau mai haere mai ki te Aotearoa o Aotearoa, wiki tua Fitu? This is yeah. This kōrero tonight is about whenua, housing and ownership. And we've got some really awesome guests here tonight to share their whakaaro and their kōrero with us all. And before I get too much into it, I'm going to kick us off with our karakia timatanga for this hui. So me noi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe mauriora. So, you want to do a bit of an introduction for us, Thomas?
Kia ora Tam, kia ora koutou. Thanks everyone for joining us. So Aotearoa Town Hall, quick description of what it is and where it came from. Basically Tam and I, we're elected councillors in Pōneke, Wellington, and when the kind of pandemic was rolling over and the lockdown was looming, we thought, hey, we're not going to be able to meet in person, but we're going to have lots of things to talk about and think about and reflect on. So we should set up some kind of virtual space for doing that. So we thought, okay, well, we'll have a virtual town hall. It can be the Aotearoa Town Hall. And so we started doing them on Monday nights. We've covered a range of different topics. And tonight is a fundamental one about land and ownership and whenua and where we live, something that everybody can relate to. We've covered a range of topics like our economy. We've covered constitutional transformation in various ways. We keep coming back to that, and I suspect we will tonight as well. And yeah, we've had a range of guests, and people have been really generous with their time and with their wisdom. And so thank you to everyone who's been on, and thank you to everyone who's with us tonight. And what else can I say? Yeah, these are recorded as well, so they're live on Facebook, so you can chat on the Facebook link. If you're seeing this right now, then you must definitely be on the Facebook page. But you can also hear them on Sunday nights on Wellington Access Radio. Thanks to Wellington Access Radio for putting them on. They're kind of working through the back catalogue, so I think they're up to week 3 next week. And what else can we say?
YouTube. Yeah. For those people who aren't into Facebook.
Yes, that's right. They're up on YouTube as soon as we get them up there, which is usually a day or two after the recording. So, shall we get into it? I think Tam, maybe you've got the first question, I think, in for our speakers tonight. So maybe.
So as we do every week, we start off with our quick fire questions, which is where we do just a bit of introductory questions, just to, warm you guys up to the kaupapa of our speakers, and then we go a bit more into detail about that. And just before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter marches and vigils held across Aotearoa today. I just want to acknowledge the murder, the systemic and continuous murder of innocent Black lives, innocent brown lives, and innocent Indigenous lives across the world at the hand of white supremacy in the state. Just thought it was important to acknowledge that before we start. Yeah. Okay, so first question, quick fire question is for Pania. And do feel free to do a bit of an intro if you would like to, about a little bit about yourself and what you do if you feel comfortable. Some people are into it, some people aren't. So kia koe te tikanga. So my first question is for Pania, and I'm really interested in hearing this. And it's about how are things going at Ihumātao at the moment? What was it like over the lockdown period, or is there any positive resolutions in sight, or what might an ideal outcome look like for your hapu? And thank you for joining us. I know you're super busy, so ngā mihi ki a koe.
Well, kia ora tātou. Tēnā koutou hoki e mātakitaki mai ana I tēnei hōtaka, I tēnei whakāturanga, I tēnei pō, I tēnei ahiahi. Ka tika ka mihi kia koutou anō. Ka mihi ki ngā kaupapa puta noa I te motu, I te au hoki, I runga I ngā tini āhuatanga o te wā, he wā pauri, he wā hari kua mo etahi, he tini ngā āhuatanga I tēnei wā, engari ka tika ka mihi ki era, kia koutou hoki, Hi, tēnā tātou. Yeah, so thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to share, some of the updates about what's happening here at Ihumātao, and of course to listen to this amazing panel. I've been watching and have seen some of the previous panels, and they've been super insightful and encouraging, and very thought-provoking as well. So thank you, Thomas and Tamatha, for setting those up. How's things going down here here at Ihumātao? Everything is very well. We're still here on the front line. We're in very positive spirits, although we are quite cold down here. There is a positive resolution in sight for us. I can share that with you all. And I say a positive resolution according, or one that we as mana whenua, as a marae and whānau, are positive about. It might not be a resolution that others would be positive about, but for us it's important, and across all Indigenous communities, that those who are at the interface of issues like these are satisfied with the outcome, or where the kōrero is heading, or where the progress is going. So we are quite positive about that. What would an ideal outcome look for us? Of course, it is the return of the whenua, so that we may be able to hold that in trust for all of Aotearoa to enjoy. But first and foremost, having an opportunity to sit down as a whānau and discuss what our hopes and aspirations for our whenua is our first priority. We've been alienated from this whenua for 156 years, so we are really excited to do that first and foremost. What an ideal outcome would look like for me personally. Of course, I've shared this many a times, and I hope the whānau share some of these visions as well. That is to return or reclaim the whenua for what it was once used for, and that was to feed the growing population of tāmaki makaurau. To be able to practice our tikanga and our kawa on our whenua, to be able to tell the stories of why Ihumātao is so significant and why it deserves to be protected and preserved for the future generations, as well as those our generation. One thing that I would like to end on in response to that question is that at the moment we are living our best lives here on the whenua as best as we can. We are growing kai, we are greeting manu whiri who are coming through here non-stop. We are here standing in solidarity with many other kaupapa putanui i te motu across the country as well as the world. And we're here on our whenua, and we're practicing some of that tikanga and the kawa that was lost many years ago through the confiscation of our whenua. So very happy at the moment.
Tēnā koe, Pania. Thank you so much for joining us and for giving us that whakaaro. And I think it's really important for us to start with the Ihumātao, because it's become, for many people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's become a symbol of what whenua is, what land is, how we should think about land and the purpose of land and our relationship to it. So it's the best place for us to start. So thank you so much for being with us. And I think building on that, I want to ask you, Jade, and I'm so excited to have Jade Kake here, esteemed architect, thinker, author from Te Tai Tokerau up in Whangarei. And I want to ask you, Jade, if you could talk about in your book, so I'm just going to wave around Jade's book, which I recommend to everybody, Rebuilding the Kāinga, from Bridget Williams Books, everyone's favorite progressive publisher. In that book, one thing that I really appreciate is you talk about this vision of rebuilding the Kāinga as the core unit of economic and political activity for Indigenous peoples in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit, because it's a really important idea, I think.
Firstly, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jade Kake ko ingoa, e te taha tōku māma, he urihau no ngā puhi, te aroa, te whakatōhia, ko Ngāti Hau me te Parawhau ngā hapu, e te taha o tōku pāpā no Horana ahau, te whānau Kuna me Sebers, ko te rewerewa me pihiawari o ku Kāinga tūturu, e tipu ake au e te rohe o te iwi Banjalang, ke pārua ahau e noho ana, koa he kai huahua, he kai tuhituhi, he kai hapai hoki. So kia ora everyone, thank you kindly for the invitation to be part of this awesome kōrero. I remember when the economics town hall was on, I was very vocal in the comments and I had lots to say, and both of you, Tamatha, and you were both saying that actually we did email you. And I'm so sorry I didn't, I don't know if I didn't see it or if just the way it was worded, it sounded a little bit like it was just a general kind of pānui and not a, can you please specifically be involved in this initiative? So anyway, just wanted to hear to you both for the work that you've been doing. I think it's opened up some really great conversations. And I think it's very timely given the COVID crisis that we take the time to reset and consider the mahi that we've been doing and the ongoing relevance of it and what might change in this post-COVID environment. So I actually wanted to use that as the starting point, and I'll circle back to your question. So a lot of the work that I've been doing has really been thinking about how we re-establish our Kāinga as the primary social and economic unit, and that necessarily requires the reoccupation of Whenua. It necessarily requires rebuilding our connections to Whenua and to each other, and enables us or requires us to rebuild our cultural relationships and our tikanga really. And acknowledging that for so many of us that has been meaningfully and by design severed through the confiscation of land, through various mechanisms, and then also the encouraged urbanization of Māori. And later we also saw a lot of migration of Māori to Australia in particular, which I mentioned because that's where I grew up. And there's a huge diaspora in Australia now, and that's another issue for those of us in the Hau Kāinga, is how do we draw our whānau home who are now settlers in another country and maybe don't necessarily think critically about their role and what that means. So I've had a bit of time to think about that, but I'll come back to that. And so as we came out of this kind of interesting, I don't want to use the word unprecedented because I think everyone's heard that enough. I think you could have a horribly damaging drinking game around that if you listen to the media. Took a shot every time somebody said unprecedented, but it has been an unusual time, and a few things were really front of mind for me as we were going through that experience. One was, my gosh, I wish we were already on our Papa Kāinga now. It just really reinforced for me how important the work that we are doing as a whānau and as whānui to re-establish our Kāinga on our ancestral whenua here in Whangarei. But also I thought a lot about how it really brought to the fore the division of power and the power imbalance between our hapu, our Hau Kāinga, and government. Kawanatanga, that actually has a huge amount of power, and yes, everyone accepted it because there was rightly a public health crisis, but there were some interesting tensions between the resources that were afforded to central government and and dispensed by central government versus the resources that were held and managed by hapu. There was tension between community checkpoints led by hapu, Hau Kāinga, versus the need to have police involvement for it to be considered legitimate. There were also some really good news stories about the way actually as hapu we know who our people are, and we were able to mobilize and lead a really good response. But to a large degree, we also were reliant on government resources to do that effectively. So to me, it was just like, wow, there's a massive power imbalance, and we know this, we all know this, but it really brought it to the fore, especially coming from Te Tai Tukiro, where every day we are seeking to have our sovereignty reinstated, and it's not something that's forgotten easily. And so he whakaputanga te tiriti o Waitangi, that is of ongoing relevance to us every day, as it should be for everybody else. And you mentioned that constitutional transformation came up a number of times. Unsurprisingly, I think we're maybe at a critical juncture where the progressive left in particular, including anti-racist, decolonial Pākehā and Tauiui, are really on board with this kaupapa of constitutional transformation and are really getting behind what we as tangata whenua have been saying for a long time. So given that we've had this really interesting experience, we've also had some really kind of worrying responses by government. So fast tracking of legislation. A big example that's relevant to us at the moment is this COVID-19 fast track legislation, which is really complementing the urban regeneration or urban redevelopment program. So there's two-part legislation that went through recently or isn't in progress. And then this really additional to that cuts through the RMA and gives government a lot of powers to push through development projects and really, I guess, compromise our rights as tangata whenua. And so we're really worried about that. But I think if the balance of power was shifted, there's also some really big opportunities. And so I think this Kāinga idea is something that we've been working on, a very old idea that we've been working on bringing back on our scraps and remnants of land. And like Pania's whānau, we really want to get back on our land too. We're in a strange position, well, a fortunate position, my whānau, where we have managed to retain our land continuously, but that doesn't mean it was easy to hold on to. And it doesn't mean we kept the whole lot. Actually, bits have been chipped away and we've managed to hold on to remnants. And we were just now in a position where we can reoccupy the whenua. But for most of us, it's been a few generations since we've been able to live there, even though we technically didn't lose all of it. And so I can't imagine what it would be like to not have that, because it's completely wrapped up in our identity. All of our stories are there. Our tupapaka are there. Actually, the Anglican Church tried to sell our marae in the 1970s, and that's where our urapa is, but that's a story for another day. And so these kind of things have happened all around the country. And so we're really trying to utilize that little bit of land we have left to rebuild, and acknowledging that the way we organize ourselves as Māori really centers around the Kāinga. So it's reinstating the power base of us as Māori, which really resides with the hapu and the Kāinga. I think I'll leave it there because I know I raised more questions than answers, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I wrote a book on this concept, but I think that what I'm really more interested in is how do we expand that more widely, because our disposition as Māori really is rooted in the whenua and the fact that we have 5% of the land left when it used to be 100%. So if we're really concerned about constitutional transformation and when we're interested in Indigenous sovereignty and supporting that, it actually needs to come from returning the land and land, power, resources. Those are the three real conditions for decolonization. And so to me, Kāinga is a really logical starting point, but it's not the ending point. And so I'm really interested to hear, even though we have a vision of what the final outcome looks like, and I think that utopian thinking and having a big picture vision is essential, I think the really hard work is determining all those in-between steps and acknowledging that some of those incremental changes, like the recent Rating of Whenua Māori Amendment Bill, is actually a really useful thing, even if it doesn't get us all the way to where we want to be. So, okay, thank you again for the invitation. I'll stop talking for the minute. Kia ora.
Oh, it's just mean. And if anyone is wondering where they can get their hands on that book, I believe it's like they do ebooks for like $5. So it's so worth it. It's $5. Yeah, exactly. You're getting just generations and generations of knowledge. So that's awesome. And we're really lucky to have you, Jade. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And I think that's a really important context that you set there about, I guess, how when you take the land out, how we have kind of just shuffled around within Aotearoa, whether it's people being urbanized into these kind of urban centres, whether people have gone across the ditch. I think it's 1/3 of Māori are actually in Australia or something. It's a huge number. And that brings about even more conversations. But you're right, constitutional transformation is, it's that big kind of utopian thinking. But I think the cool thing about, I guess, what we're doing here on the town hall is that people who might not regularly engage with constitutional transformation as a concept can see how it's relevant to different areas, and that if you're passionate about a different area, there's a way for you to kind of take that forward. And like we always say, everybody has a role to play in realizing that vision. So thank you. That was awesome. That was a really awesome introduction. Thank you, Jade. Now I'm going to move on to another person that I look up to, that I love reading their tweets. Someone that I actually connected with through Tuia, which is a kaupapa that actually a few of us on this call are involved in, which is a rangatahi Māori kaupapa. And for those wondering, Jackie and I are not related. Jackie is a Te Tai Tokiro Paul, I believe, and I am a Ngāti Awa Paul. But yeah, Jackie, awesome. Kia ora, no mai, e hoa. I wanted to ask you for your quick fire question. If you could talk a little bit about your work on housing inequality and helping to raise those voices of those people who are bearing the real brunt of the housing crisis here in Aotearoa.
Kia ora e hoa, and tēnā koutou katoa. Firstly, yeah, just like to thank you both for the invitation, and just really excited to be here, you know, especially with other people doing the same kaupapa, so really excited. Just firstly, hui rea hau Ngāti Kāinga ki Retaunga, Ngāti Tūwhareto, me ngā pui hoki, engari anō hoa anau ki Tāmaki Makaurau, he kaimahi rangahau Māori me ngā kaihoahoa whenua, ko Jacqueline talking. So kia ora. Yeah, I guess it's really grateful to be able to bounce off the back of both Pania and Jade. Really grateful to be in this space. We're guided by, you know, other wahine Māori doing some awesome mahi, and yourself, Tam. I feel really empowered and inspired when I am with other wahine Māori because of the koroai that we've been able to work under. So really excited just to tautoko this kaupapa. But, you know, we can talk about all the housing issues, all we want, and centre equity and all these kind of values, but I think it's always coming back to the whenua, which Jade and Pania have spoken about. And in this kind of concept of sovereignty, and until we address, you know, land at its core, and Ranginui Walk always talks about it, that it's the economic base of our sovereignty. And so until we address the, you know, ongoing issues around land and whenua in this country, everything else is just another added layer to the onion. So that's the core of where we need to be looking at, because we already know, and we've got all the data. You know, how much more data do you want? Where our homelessness people who consist of Māori are increasing, and our home ownership rates are declining. So inherent relationship between the land and the whenua, and us as a people. So really centering justice now, you know, and we're seeing it more evident in today's society. So until we seek to address that at its core, we will continue to be displaced and gentrified for generations. But at the same time, I feel a lot of hope and inspiration that we're becoming more, I guess, aware and conscious around what's going on in society. Until we dismantle the existing systems that don't seek to serve our people right now, there won't be any change. And so those are the types of cycles that we need to break as a people. So although I feel like I'm doing this one little kaupapa, you know, knowing that other people across the motu are doing their little bit, hoping that we'll continue to seek change for future generations, and have, you know, the COVID is just one part, you know, and we've seen that exacerbate and expose existing issues that we've all seen, and we all know of. But again, coming back to Jade and Pan's discussion around the redistribution of power and resources. So even this concept of Kāinga, which is sometimes being overused by institutions that they shouldn't be, when actually it doesn't, you know, it doesn't seek to serve our people, in which those concepts are inherently embedded in. And so through Te Ao Māori and Māoridom, until we maintain that as a people, and normalise that, you know, in speech marks, I don't think anything will change. And so I'm seeing an interesting shift now, and for our generation, you know, see the work that you do, Tam, in this space, that we're all chipping away. So housing's one part of the, you know, ecosystem that we need to seek to address in this kōrero. So we'll keep it short, and looking forward to thinking about, you know, how we all align in this kaupapa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jackie. Oh, it's so good to be getting through these these questions and getting all this material out. One of the things we struggle with, Tam, is the depth and the amount of material that comes out on these in these kōrero. It's almost overwhelming sometimes, but we'll keep going. And so I want to bring you and Robbie. Now, Robbie, welcome, kia ora, no mai, haere mai. Robbie, comedian, and for many known best as white man behind a desk, which sounds better than it is. No, which is better than it sounds.
How dare you?
Sorry, it is better than it sounds. Yeah, not really made for this. So, Robbie, I wanted to ask you, I guess we've been talking about the fact that maybe there's a bit of an awakening around some of these topics, constitutional transformation, for example. But I guess if we're honest, a lot of people, most people maybe, are not quite waking up. And I wanted to ask you about that in the context of the Citizens Handbook, which is a web series and podcast that you've made. And I guess I'm asking, what made you want to make that podcast? What made you want to what was your driver, your motivation behind the Citizens Handbook?
Yeah, kia ora koutou, and thank you to Thomas and Tam for inviting me and encouraging me to do this. If you're worried about depth, it's good to bring in a comedian just to say things that make sense and maybe don't have that much depth. No, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. But yeah, why did we want to do it? I think it started maybe a few years ago. We were invited to the Otaki summer camp that Nikki Hager and a few other people, cool people, run. And I just met a lot of really awesome people who were doing really awesome work. And I felt like the one thing that kind of united them was that they had a real clear sense of like our history and how New Zealand came to be the way it is. And it didn't overwhelm them or make them feel like hopeless. Like they could still just get up in the morning and do their work to make New Zealand better. And that was kind of unfathomable to me at the time, and it's still something I'm working through. And but I just kind of was really inspired by a lot of those people, and just kind of felt like, oh, I want to be like that, and I want to go on that journey. And so started going on that journey with my co-writer Phineas Teppert, and we also, there's only one thing I really know how to do, which is kind of tell jokes, and that's what I can do. So I thought, well, if I'm going to go on this journey, then I will take the audience that I've kind of built up with White Man Behind a Desk and be like, let's go on this journey together. Let's try and like move through some like painful truths as a team. And so that was the idea behind it. And so then, yeah, so for people who don't know, White Man Behind a Desk was kind of more like just mocking news of the day. And then the Citizens Handbook is like a little guidebook to history of New Zealand and then how the systems work now based on, as a result of that history. And just kind of, yeah, it's hopefully in that starting place of helping people wake up and confront some uncomfortable truths. And I think like, yeah, definitely, I think I'll talk more about this later, but I just think that like most people are really busy in their day-to-day lives and don't spend a lot of time thinking about stuff. And like, I'm just lucky that I have like conned RNZ into giving me time to do it. But like, I just think that there's a general vibe. Like most people understand things just based on a general vibe rather than like knowing things specifically. And so lots of people who have a voice and have a platform, I think need to keep speaking up all the time, constantly, because it's only through like constant voices and constant displays and constant expressions and all these different ways and forms and worlds that general vibe starts to change. But yeah, so that's why we did that web series, and that's who I am as well.
Oh, tēnā koe, Robbie. Thank you so much for that introduction, and I just want to say, look, you're a great comedian as well. I saw that video of that comedian over the weekend that was mocking Haritihi Pango's name, and I was just like, some of these guys are trash, but not you. You're awesome. And I loved Citizens Handbook. I wish we had something like that in school. I come from a Decile 1 school, and we had I think we just had a blanket social studies class, and we just did not go in depth like that. So I wish we had access to stuff like that back in the day, which was only 5 years ago. I don't know what I'm talking like. But yeah, it was only 5 years ago. That's how terrible that's why we need stuff like this in our education system. But actually, I remember the first video I saw of yours in the White Man Behind a Desk series was your treaty one, and you're just pretty much like, I'm not going to talk about this because I'm not the best person or most informed person to talk about this. And then I think you had Sunny Ngātai do the whole video, and I just thought that was mean. I was just like, class, pure class. So thank you for your mahi on that, and awesome to have you here tonight. And now for our last quick fire question, we have Monique van Alphen Fyfe. I hope I said that properly. Aroha mai if not. So Monique was actually a late addition to this lineup because I have lots of mates that are currently studying law at Vic, and some of them are watching. Hi Marlon. And I remember some of my friends saying to me, just explaining to me, because I'm always on this decolonization tip, right? And they're just like, well, do you understand the difference between, or how property rights or people's different understandings of that are really the crux of colonization? I had never thought about that before. And I just thought it was so amazing that you have so many students that don't necessarily have a background in being around Māori people in Māori spaces, but they had this really awesome concept and understanding of those fundamental differences. And I thought, if you can teach a whole class full of law students that, then you should come on here and have a kōrero, because you're obviously an excellent communicator. And Monique was so humble. She was like, no, we don't need more Pākehā voices. I'm all good. Surely there's better people. But I was like, no, you are awesome as well. So, and it goes back to that whole part about we all have a role to play. So thank you so much for giving us your time, Monique, and for being here today. So for your question, I was just wondering if you could go more in depth into what you teach as a living, and just talking about, I guess, the underpinnings of property law from a Western perspective, and how these we're in conflict with Māori views of Kaitiaki over the whenua.
Tēnā koe, that was it's quite an introduction. I started teaching this year, and as a lawyer in Wellington, I have had I feel like I've got an enormous wallop of privilege, and it's necessary to use it somehow. One of the interesting things I found when I started teaching was that there was quite an extraordinary pressure from the students, rather than necessarily the faculty, to get the stuff into the law curriculum. So I was already going to do it, but it was rather awesome to have a whole bunch of law students really keen on hearing about it. So I'll do a little bit of background around where Pākehā property law concepts came from, and then talk a little bit about how I think that is different from the kind of themes we're seeing through from the other speakers here. And I do preface this by saying I am Pākehā, no more Whakaata, no, sorry. Aroha mai, and I'm just really privileged to be here. This is unbelievably great, thank you. So Pākehā ideas of land stem from medieval times. They are sourced in the sort of feudal relationships between the king, his lords, their tenants and their serfs. And in very basic terms, at that time, having an interest in land came with obligations to the lord to provide financial and military and spiritual support to the lord. So all the serfs would be supplying money, food, and supply resources and obligations to each rung of the ladder as it went all the way up to the king. Now, over time, a lot of these kind of rungs of the ladder just started to kick themselves out because people ended up not having heirs to inherit, and so that rung would disappear and that kind of thing. So eventually the king, everyone held land directly from the king, those who were lucky enough to do so. And so this kind of created this idea of the Crown having this underlying ownership of literally all of the land. It's all vested in the Crown, and that everybody who has an interest in land has grants from the Crown. And so that in a conceptual sense is what is behind a lot of Pākehā land law today. And we've largely done away with that in a practical sense, but it still sits there as this idea behind the Crown sovereignty, that they have imperium over what's called imperium, like dominate the right to be sovereign over that particular land. But everybody who owns land, as we sort of colloquially call it, is sort of treated as having full legal ownership, even though there is this conceptual idea that you only hold it on a grant from the Crown. Now, this ownership is really, really, really individualistic. It doesn't rest on any kind of pre-existing connection with the land. The basic tenets of land law are that an owner is free to do with it what they want, and they can, usually the idea is that you'll essentially try and make money off it, because a lot of this is also sourced in these conceptual philosophical ideas of John Locke, where you had the right to land if you were using it. So you can see a lot of dangerous ideas there as we march along to colonisation. And so owners were free to do with what they wanted, and the idea was to make use of the resources and make money. As long as you didn't interfere with other people's right to use the land, or you didn't harm other people's land, then you could do with what you want. And one of the things that is really, really key to it is this concept of alienation. So you could actually give all of your rights to somebody else, or more appropriately sell them, so that you sever any rights you have to that land by giving it outright to somebody else or transferring it to someone else. And once you give that transfer, once you make that transfer, it doesn't come with obligations to a wider community. There's no obligation to the person who gave it to you. There's no obligation to the community behind that person. It's a very individualistic kind of take, and a very kind of private law kind of take on what these rights and obligations might be with the land, to the land, and to other people. And again, no expectation that you'll look after the land, except to the degree of not interfering with other people's rights. And so in that sense, you can see a lot of threads about so the underlying concept of sovereignty being really important to land, and that being an underlying concept to land and how we disseminate it amongst the population. But you can also see it's really about managing an individual's rights to land and their ability to make money off it, essentially. And the really classic statement of any kind of property is from Blackstone, and he thought that property was a person's sole and despotic dominion over a thing, including land. So obviously, tikanga Māori is in respect of whenua is vastly different. That tikanga that are particularly important to land are whanaungatanga, kaitiaki-tanga, manaaki-tanga, mana and utu, as well as tapu and noa as a sort of system of managing it as well. And obviously there's a deep and fundamental relationship to the land through whakapapa, the notion that the land itself is an ancestor, it's actually part of your community, and tangata whenua are part of, nourished by the land. And because the land is an ancestor, one of the reasons, is part of the iwi o the hapu, and it's your whanaungatanga, there's a kinship value, and kaitiaki-tanga has to be exercised over it. And because Te Ao Māori, as Justice Williams says, is all about relationships, manaaki-tanga is also important. So not just looking after the land itself or the people themselves within the land, in terms of your community, it's also about being generous to manuhiri, creating and maintaining relationships beyond your group. And I really enjoyed hearing Pania talk about, using your resources to welcome manuhiri onto Ihumātao. And so that kind of generosity and the caring for the land and the people who relate to it would in turn enhance the mana of the rangatira and the hapu in that area. And so your strength and connections get stronger, and your sort of mana is enhanced. And one of the ways this plays out, and one of the things I think is, really, really important to read is the Waitangi Tribunal's Muri Whenua Land Report, which sets out these differences of approach to land, and particularly contract law in relation to land, on the part of Pākehā and also on the part of Māori, to look at what actually went wrong here when these two kind of things met. So I'll assume that we know enough about contracts for sale that I don't have to really recap that. Like, you just make an agreement and you part ways with the thing, whether it's land or objects. But in terms of transferring an interest in whenua under tikanga, Sir Eddie Jury in the Muri Whenua report notes that tuku, which is what Pākehā sort of interpreted as sale, was in fact a way of incorporating other individuals or groups into the hapu or iwi. It was about creating whanaungatanga links and ensuring that you would enhance your mana by letting these other people use your whenua. So it was never an alienation. It was never a thing that would be severing your links, because you can't do that because of whakapapa and whanaungatanga, that the land is part of who you are. You can't sever those links in that way. So if you were the lucky person who was on the receiving end of a grant of an interest in whenua from Māori, there was obligations to the gifter. So there was these ideas of having to give back in terms of creating that whanaungatanga, maintaining those relationships, kaitiakitanga over the land, manaakitanga to anyone who would come into the land as well. So this aspect of it, you get some rights, but also receive obligations, was just never recognized. Well, it was not recognized by the vast majority of Pākehā, let's put it that way, at the time. And I think we can all see the result of that around us every day, sort of writ large over the whole entire country. And these concepts reinforce that tikanga is about forming and developing and nurturing relationships with the land and with other communities. And that's a really clearly very different fundamental approach to a Western way of thinking. And it certainly leads on to the constitutional kind of questions, because these two frameworks are so extraordinarily different and stem from such extraordinarily different social and cultural conceptions of what property means, what relationships are, and what your relationship with the land is as well. Yeah.
That's great. I'm sure we all wish that you were the law teacher of property law forever. That everyone had to go through and hear actually all of you talking, because I just find that very helpful and makes a lot of sense to me, just kind of breaking that down. So thank you. And I know later we've got a question for you about how we could maybe move towards reconciling those two different types of understandings, which will be really interesting to hear your perspective. But did anybody else want to add on to that specific kōrero at all before we move on to our kind of more deeper questions? Cool. Kate Pai. Oh, do you want to say something, Thomas?
Well, I did kind of want to say something, but I'm not really here to say things. I'm here to ask questions. But I did want to say that was so amazing, and I'm going to listen to that again a couple of times. And like, oh man, it's just like the way we think about land is so messed up, and just the way you started that whole little set of remarks, the fact that Pākehā consideration of law comes from medieval times, and deference to the king and his lords, and how he can make sure they've got money for war. It's kind of like, well, no wonder it's messed up. I mean, if that's where it's coming from, it just kind of makes me feel like, geez. And then there's I read this other book, which you might know, called Owning the Earth by this guy, Andrew Linklater. And he was a land surveyor, and he was obsessed with land surveying. And he wrote this book about land tenure types. So ownership, relationships of ownership from different people and cultures and civilizations throughout history to land. And he found basically that the private property society that we have right now, and that derives from that kind of feudal Western medieval system, he described it as a bizarre mutation alien to most of humanity. And yet we kind of think of it as totally normal. And in fact, if you think of it as not normal, then you're considered a complete sort of weirdo, and you can't challenge it. So I feel like anyway, that was just a rant that I needed to get off my chest. But back to you,
I'd
Dan.
love to ask a question more so to Monique around this kind of, if we think about legislative kind of approaches, planning tools, housing as tools and acts of colonization, how do we ensure that we don't continue to perpetuate the issues that continue to marginalize our people, and what does that look like moving forward?
Ooh.
Maybe some thoughts, maybe not the solutions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my strategy has been that I just do the best I can to make the biggest difference that I can in whatever role I'm in. And I also was very, very pleased to be able to do this particular aspect of these sorts of roles, because I am aware that there are a lot of really great Māori students in the class, and I want them to feel like they are able to be their whole selves whilst they go through the law. And I think that having Māori voices who are able to make strong change and develop the law in a way that's really helpful is just so fundamentally important to the way this is going to go. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I hope it's working. But I mean, personally, I feel really optimistic about the law and the legislation, and how I think one of the other things that's really important is how it's interpreted and applied, because often the law is what it is. Like, the lawmakers sort of do what they can do, and maybe they're making a good job of it, maybe they're not. But even if they are making a good job of it, you need people who actually understand it and can apply it correctly in those positions, in decision-making positions, not just judges, but like, in councils and engineers who are making decisions, or heritage assessors who are making decisions about various different things. You need that everywhere. And if we can start infiltrating and particularly into those decision-making positions, I think it'd be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry.
No, you go.
Jade. Oh, I just wanted to make a quick comment, only because, I know that you're doing your part over here, and then we continue to see complex issues, like the SHA legislative that was fast-tracked as well, and which is why I'm sure Jade is continuing to advocate in that space. And we know the major disconnect between, legislation and law, and how that is delivered in practice. Major disconnect in the way in which that is implemented. So yeah, just really wanted to hear your thoughts on that. So thank you for sharing.
I just wanted to add that I really think we need to move towards decommodifying land. And that's not necessarily a problem with our land tenure system, though I'm sure there's elements that need reform, but how that also relates to financing and the financial sector, and how that also relates to our planning system. So to use a really small illustrative example, in some of our Papa Kāinga mahi, we're looking at keeping the land in a single piece of whenua Māori, not looking to subdivide, but we're able to use the zoning to achieve the land uses that we want, which vary from commercial to housing to ngahere restoration to marae, and we're able to do all of those things because at this point in time we've had some really key changes at a district council level that enable us to do this using a Papa Kāinga development plan and a light industry precinct. So it's using the tools of the planning system which already exist but are being executed at a district council level. And so we don't have to break up the land to be able to reoccupy and to have various compatible uses, but also to be able to have multiple households. We don't have to subdivide. And then I guess the other part comes down to financing. And so there is some money available for development on whenua Māori, but it's really limited. So there's some grants from Te Puni Kōkiri, Ministry of Māori Development. There is a Kāinga whenua loan product that only Kiwi Bank administers, which is hugely flawed, but exists. But there is starting to be other alternative forms of financing. And so if we were able to do something like they've done in the United States, where there's basically the iwi or the tribe becomes the financial institution, then it removes some of these issues around needing to use the land as security to access development finance. So I've got lots more thoughts on that, but I guess I just wanted to make a short illustrative point around how it's not just the land tenure system, it's also the planning system, it's also the financing, and of course the wider societal attitudes that drive change in those systems.
if I might be able to add in as well here, from I think it takes a multi-pronged approach. And for those of you sitting and watching, thinking, how might I, be able to work towards some of the things that have already been spoken about. I think simply, for me, I think it's about Māori, especially exercising our tino rangatiratanga. And we've seen that with what has happened here at Ihumātao. We've seen that at Takaparafa, at Bastion Point, and we saw that with Te Kōpua and many other successful Māori political movements across our nation and our history. For many of us, we're so conditioned to think that we can't do anything. And, I get the whakatauki around, tā apiranga ngata saying, kia mau ki ngā te rākau a te Pākehā hei tiki tiki mo tō mahunga. We do need those people who are able to infiltrate those spaces, but we also need those other people outside doing the actions, doing the mahi that influence those at those tables to turn the cogs of change. And I think it's important to have a multi-pronged approach.
I know I keep talking, but I just did want to add, because I've been reflecting on that a lot lately, with the current unrest in the United States. And I think it's driven a lot of us in other parts of the world to think about, what does it mean for us here? And I think I've thought a lot about that relationship between advocacy and activism, and these are all just tactics. And so whether it's writing plan change submissions, or whether it's going out and occupying and protest, whether it's utilizing the media to shape a narrative and influence decision makers or pressure them, I think we need to be really strategic in our approach, but also recognize that all of these different approaches are valid and important when deployed together within an effective strategy.
Far out, he whakaro rangatira all around. I'm actually going to go back to you, Pans, to kick off our second round of questions, which is more going into detail into some of the kind of themes that we've already touched on, and kind of rounds back to what you were just saying. But I was just wondering if you could maybe, from your perspective, just talk about why you think Ihumātao has captured so many people's hearts. And I mean that in that I know here in Wellington, like as soon as that tono was put out, or you put that weddle out there, our whole household, there's 5 of us here, all tauira, just dropped everything and headed up there. And it was same story for Māori, Pākehā, Tauiwera, everyone headed up there. So why do you think it is that this, that Ihumātao just really made it, and why is it so important that land is returned to mana whenua? Because I know we are always seeing, and everybody sees, return the land, but why is that so important, especially in the current kind of political or environmental context?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge and thank all of you and those who are watching who came to Ihumātao to stand in solidarity with our whānau and our marae and our hapu and our iwi. Mei kore ko koutou, mei kore ko mātou, no reira katika ka mihi kia koutou katoa. If it wasn't for the support that we received, I don't think that we would be in the position that we're in now. I think many people came to Ihumātao for many different reasons. Firstly, we were very fortunate to have occupied or reclaimed, I like to say, our whenua at least 2.5, nearly 3 years prior to the call out being made in July last year. And so during that time, we were able to mobilize support. Certain individuals heard about what we were doing, and they would bring out their schools, their classes, their wānanga, their whānau, their hapu. And when people came, first they felt the connection with the whenua. And there's this saying that we have in our campaign that goes, that people came for the whenua but stayed for the people. And so they came to the whenua, they saw why it was so significant, they felt it wairua, and saw it tinana, and then they developed relationships with the people who were here. And you know, and through conversations and through knowing what we stood for, people came because you know, Ihumātao in this land struggle stood and stands for so many things. You know, it stands for feminism because it is the wahine and the kuia and the aunties and the whaia who are leading and have led this kaupapa. It is about, you know, preventing environmental degradation, because with this development will come increased pollution to our moana, our awa, and our whenua. It was about protecting the wāhi tapu, the archaeological and geological sites, because we know how important they are to our nation's history and how important they are to the identity of our people and our whānau. They came because it was about justice. It was about upholding human rights. It was about upholding te tiriti o Waitangi, he whakaputanga, and so on. And I think too, it was quite timely because we had a lot of our Kake who stood at Takaparawa and stood at Te Kōpua with Eva and did the Māori Land March, who feared that before they left this whenua, or before they passed, that they wouldn't see another movement like Ihumātao, or like those that they participated in many generations ago. And so I think, you know, we were waiting for another movement. We, you know, Māori issues were a hot topic at the time that the call out was made, and to, you know, I think our generation especially, because those were the ones who were on the front line and who have continued to support this kaupapa and you know, see it through. We're in a better position now, because for many of us, we went through wharekura, wharewananga, we went to university, you know, we learned the tools of the Pākehā to be able to fight these sorts of fights. So, you know, our activism looks very different to what my parents and what my grandparents' activism looked like. And so we're very privileged in that sense. And so we were able to mobilize people using tools such as social media, you know, the different strategies that we employed, such as going to the UN and things like that, helped to attract people to this kaupapa. Why should whenua be returned to Māori, especially confiscated whenua? For us, there was a tongikura that was said or left behind by Kingi Tāwhiao, the second Māori king, and it goes, I riro whenua atu me hoki whenua mai. And so for us, it was about honouring that legacy, honouring that tongikura that was left for us. It was about seeing that the land that was confiscated was returned. And for many of us, and as has already been mentioned, you know, why whenua is so important to Māori. You know, there's so many whakatauki out there that, you know, talk to that connection. You know, toi tū te whenua whatungarongaro te tangata, te toto o te tangata he kai, te oranga o te tangata he whenua. And so that's why whenua needs to be returned to Māori. Why else? Because it's just, and it was, you know, it is, you know, being Kaitiaki for our whenua was guaranteed to us under Te Tiriti o Waitangi in Article 2, you know, guaranteed unqualified exercise of chieftainship over our whenua and our taonga. And so that's why whenua should be returned. And before I get too fiery, I better stop there. So yeah, koira tāku.
Tēnā koe, Pania. And yeah, you are so right, as ever. Okay, so thinking about the future and coming and the present, I want to come to you, Jade, and just ask if you could talk a bit about some of the projects you're involved with, because you know, in your book and also in some of your other writings and talkings, there one can discern a bit of a resurgence in the movement towards Kāinga and Māori housing. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that and your some specific projects and why they might be, you know, a better alternative to some of the ways that we've configured housing in Aotearoa, New Zealand in the last 150 years.
Kia ora. Yeah, I think there's been a real strong drive for a long while now to return to the whenua and return to the Kāinga, but it hasn't really gotten much easier. So there's still so many barriers. It's atrocious, really. There was a report in 2011 by the Office of the Auditor General looking at housing on Māori land, and it listed a whole raft of barriers and why it's so difficult. And not much has changed, really not much has changed. So we've got these tiny scraps of land and a strong desire to get back to them. But there's still so many barriers, and I don't want that to sound kind of hopeless, because there's hope, but it's too slow. The resources too limited, and you need to really have a lot of skills specific to planning and development and the land law system, and there's so much that you need to understand just to navigate the system. And then you go to these government agencies and the staff tell you the wrong information. And I get people who come to me, and the reason I have the skills I have is because my whānau had this desire. So I spent a decade getting competent enough to be able to do what I do now. And, you know, it's hard, it's really challenging. And so I get whānau come to me all the time where they say, oh, I went to Te Puni Kōkiri, I went to the Māori Land Court and they told me this. And I'm like, what they told you is wrong. You need to go back to them and tell them this and clarify what their rights are. And it's really, you know, I spent about 4 years of my life focusing on being an advocate for Māori housing and, you know, starting to address those structural barriers that exist. And that work is ongoing. And yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to labor the point too much, but it's so important to us that we get back on our whenua, but there's still so many roadblocks in the way. And that's just for those of us that still have land. Keeping in mind, it's only 5% of the country. So, okay, moving on past that bit though, you know, we've been on a long journey, our whānau. We're about, you know, it's probably about 12 years now, because I think we started when my grandfather was still alive and he passed away in 2008. And I would have been in my 3rd year of uni of my undergrad. So it's, you know, it's been a long journey. So we've got a few Kāinga projects in the works in whāngarei, and every day we get a bit closer. So we're about to lodge our Kāinga development plans with Whangarei District Council. And again, there was a lot of advocacy that went into supporting that plan change, which meant that we could do Kāinga as a matter of right. And really, they just want to know that you can meet the servicing requirements. It's still a lot of work to assemble a plan like that, but it takes away resource consent fees, and it takes away the right to object to the development by neighbours or the general public. And if you saw the submissions on the plan change itself, there were so many people in our district who had horrible racist things to say. This, you know, say no to race-based separatism, and they're just going to build shanties down the road, and how come Māori should have a separate thing? And, you know, it was funny at first, the first few, and then I just kept reading, and it's, you know, everything is quite personal and quite emotional. So it's actually sometimes really hard doing the work that I do, because I have to be this like competent professional, but actually all these things are really personal and really hurtful. And it's, I don't know, it can be rough. Yeah, so I don't know if I didn't really answer the question. I went on a slightly winding journey, but I think the desire is there, but the barriers are still there. I think we do need to have successful projects. And I did a podcast 2 years ago now called Indigenous Urbanism, and some of those projects focused on Kāinga and really the efforts of Kāinga to reoccupy their whenua. And a really good example I liked was Hinewai Ormsby and Waiōhiki, I think it is, in the Hawke's Bay, and she's amazing. But I really loved her whakaaro and her vision for how they return to the whenua and how they're living and breathing it now. And I know we don't have nearly enough of those examples, but I really hold those up as beacons of hope. And I hope that if we're able to get more of these developments successfully on the ground and start living and breathing it again, keeping in mind there's some whānau that have never left their pa, their kāinga, and have been able to maintain continuous occupation. So I don't want to marginalize them with this whakaaro, but for the majority of us, we haven't been able to maintain our kāinga and continuous occupation. And it's a dream for many of us. So yeah, I think if you can get some successful developments off the ground, then you can use those as, besides the benefit for the individual whānau involved, which is massive, you can also use those as evidence and tools to push for those structural changes that are so desperately required. I guess the last point I wanted to make on this rambling response is that, you know, I keep going back to the fact that it's such a tiny amount of land, and that's true. It's a drop in the ocean. We really need more land returned if this is going to become something that really makes a difference to our settlement patterns. And, you know, there's so many tools to achieve that. I mean, it's by design that the settlement process only returns 1 to 2% of what was lost. You could return all Crown lands. You could manage return of all Department of Conservation lands, which is, I think, like 30-something% of the land mass. And you actually could provide provision for return of private property ownership. I really liked the idea of, you know, whether you run kind of a bequest program where for Pākehā who are, you know, when they're writing their wills, they could vest it back in hapu, because I think there are people that would do that if there was a simple mechanism to do so and they were supported to do so. So I think we do need to see a process of returning more and more land into hapu ownership. I also think about the tools we have under the Public Works Act. Like, we're just in the process of passing a 2-part urban development legislation that enables you to compulsorily acquire land for urban renewal projects and also consolidate Crown land holdings. Now, imagine if actually mana whenua were in the driving seat of that. I think you have a very different outcome to what we've seen with urban renewal projects so far, which has really been gentrification and displacement of already marginalized communities. Okay, I'm going to leave it there.
I know it's you next, Tam, but I was just going to jump into do a shout out to Whenua Ormsby, because Whenua is a very super cool individual and also a regional councillor. And I met Whenua recently at a thing because we were both elected as regional councillors, her in the Hawke's Bay and me down here in Wellington. And yeah, it was so cool to read about her in your book as well, Jade. And yeah, I'd listen to your so-called rambling responses any day, Jade. So yeah.
Hard out. And also, I didn't even know that you were the Indigenous urbanism person, but I've like listened to heaps of them, and then I just saw your name now, so I'm like, yeah. So that's on is it on Spotify as well, Jade, or is it just on the Apple?
No, it's on all of them. And just a random plug to Robbie, if you're able to get RNZ to give me money, you should help with that, because I really want to make another season.
Yes,
love that. Let's talk. Let's make it happen.
Collaboration maybe perhaps as well. No, but no, that's awesome. So yes, you can find the Indigenous Urbanism podcast on all the platforms, which is mean I didn't even realize that was you. That's awesome. Anyway, cool. Sorry, just like, yes, I'll listen to that. But yeah, no, totally. And I think it's really beautiful that you've really created and tailored your whole life around the ambition of your whānau. I think that's just so beautiful and powerful. And what you said earlier in your quick fire part about how these are all tactics, and then how Pania was talking a bit about how our activism looks a lot different, and I guess we have a lot more privilege in the way that the different tools that we can harness and utilize. And it's just awesome hearing from all of you, because it is just very incredibly inspiring.
I just wanted to add one thing. So there was, just before lockdown, we had a tangi for one of our kaumātua who has been driving, it's our uncle Billy Tangariki, and he was the kaumātua driving our Papa Kāinga development at Pihiawari. And one of my uncles in his mihi to me and my cousin, who have been the kaimahi on these 2 Papa Kāinga projects, was, you know, just to really mihi to us for our mahi pepa, mahi ture. And it reminded me, actually, that's the role that we've articulated for ourselves, and that within our role, we've got within our whānau, we've got a diversity of skills and various roles to play. But it was really, I guess, strengthened me to have our uncle on the taumata recognise us in that way, and remind us that actually our whānau do notice the work that we're doing, and support us in the work that we're doing. And there's a reason we went away to university and got these skills and know how to navigate planning and legal systems and architecture and all of these things. And sometimes it feels really like hard and lonely to be in such a Pākehā-centric environment, but we can see the impact that our mahi is having, because we actually are seeing change in our professions, and most importantly, we're able to see changes and make a positive contribution to our own whānau and hapu.
Hard out, and I know within our iwi, a lot of our uri o Ngāti Awa, we're all just like so hungry to give back those tools that we've learned. Like Te Kawa is watching this right now. He was on that Zoe with our the rangatahi of our iwi, but we all have these different like skills that we've accumulated through university, polytechnic, just the whare wānanga, all of these different avenues, and now we're all just really hungry to be able to give that back in some way or another. So yeah, I just think you're so right, and now it's a bit of a struggle trying to get the runanga in some cases to let us give back and find places for us, because we know that often they're engaged to do different things, and sometimes they're like, oh well, we don't have the capacity, but there's, which is a whole nother corridor about a whole bunch of other stuff, but for us, we just want to be able to give back in that way. So yeah, totally tautoko what you're saying, Jade. Perhaps you will expand on that some more too, Jackie, in your corridor. So I apologize for the way that this question is worded, because I know what I'm trying to like pull out of this question, but I know I haven't framed it very well. So I'll just say what it is, and you just take it wherever it may lead you. Don't worry if it's not answering the question, just you take it wherever you want to take it. So the question is, so usually in disasters or state of emergencies, our marae open their doors up for the community, including the most vulnerable members of our community. But that was a lot different during COVID, because obviously there were pretty heavy restrictions on our marae who have opened those doors and been homes for a lot of people. And so I was wondering, I guess because of that kind of lack of social or cultural infrastructure, the government needed to step in and provide that housing for many people. And so I was just wondering what changes that you saw during the lockdown would you like to see remain, and what needs to be done, I suppose, from a non-government perspective as well, to ensure that all people have a safe and warm and dry roof over their heads.
Yeah, kia ora, Tams. Firstly, I just wanted to add one point to build off what Jade was talking about. Just really wanted to acknowledge and appreciate the mahi that she does in such an elitist profession, you know, in the different world and the way she has to work in. So I really want to acknowledge that, where, you know, within architecture, people are talking about double glazing windows when some of our whānau haven't even got water or a toilet. So just really want to acknowledge the work you do, and you too, Pans, around the mahi that you do, because how can our kids grow up and, you know, say their mihi or whakapapa when their mountains are being quarried to deliver roads across the motu, where their rivers are being drained to, you know, support the city, or the moana is being, you know, extracted for all these minerals and resources they don't seek to serve the people or the Kāinga that it is embedded in. So really just want to acknowledge both your mahi in this space. And you know, just going to the question that you've just asked, Tams, you know, it's really complex. You know, I think about how marae are the most untapped, you know, potential of cultural institutions across the motu, but the lack of investment more so, and just, you know, that last bill that was kind of passed, and just the pushback, you know, around police being able to enter them, you know, just all these kind of discriminatory and racist kind of laws and policies put in place, where, you know, at the core of what they do is centered on supporting whānau.
Oh.
Is that everyone noticing a lag there? Oh, lost Jackie.
This has never happened before.
No, this is where the pros just, stall and say something
Um,
else, or go to somebody else.
Robbie, crack a joke.
Yeah, Robbie, you're a pro. Oh. What do you reckon, Tam?
I think she was going to say we should start a revolution.
I'm keen.
I think she agrees.
Okay.
I reckon move on and then just go back to Jackie when she comes back on. I just texted her saying, in case she didn't know that she's been lost off the Zoom link.
Oh, good work, Jade. Well, I might go to Robbie then, not for a joke unless you have a joke lined up, but just for your for the pre-prepared question. So yeah, thanks for the Citizens Handbook. It was great lockdown viewing. We binged it here in this little flat. But yeah, there's quite a bit of talk about colonization, obviously, and land, not specifically housing, but certainly the economy and the way land was perceived throughout history. And I guess I wanted to ask you, having been through that process of, doing the research and making the web series and then putting it up and I guess judging the reaction and how it's kind of landed with various people. What would you say you've learned about the way people, different groups of people, think about land and through that housing in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Yeah, I think it definitely resonated with me what Jade was saying about the getting the feedback from the from her district and being like, okay, cool, that's where we're at right now. I think like just this being a part of this conversation, which is such a privilege, and just being able to hear such specific and hopeful and clear optimism, and then the gap between that and like the world that I live in, which is YouTube comments with like a largely Pākehā audience, and sort of living in that world and trying to moderate comments and keep on top of things. It's not it's not great out there. I'll be honest, things aren't super great. And I think I think it can be really frustrating as well. I think thinking about that general vibe thing, like obviously politicians get elected based on like the public's you got elected. The politicians get elected based on like the public's general vibe of a politician. It's like it's the things they do, but it's also how they talk and what they wear and like the colors they associate themselves with, and all the choices that you have to make that just affect the general feeling that people have. And I think it can be really hard when like the great work that everybody's doing, and also like all of the education work that so many people are trying to do, and then you get the sense that so many other aspects of our society are sending a totally different message. And so I was just thinking about so a Pākehā viewer reached out to me about the bit where we talked about George Gray and his war crimes, and like said that there was a cat at a department at Vic Uni that is named after George Gray. And it was like, and they were just like, there's something about, I think, it seems unfathomable that it could be as bad as it was when there are seemingly rational people sending signs that everything was fine. Like I was just, at the protest today, people were giving speeches, and then behind them is Wakefield Street, a big sign for Wakefield Street. And it's like, those are big cues that everyone sees. We're doing our best, and RNZ, thank you so much for, giving us money to like get the word out. And like, we managed to get a few 100,000 views, but like millions of people see Wakefield Street every day. And so the vibe that you send out is that like Wakefield was a pretty fine guy, presumably, because I've met my counselors and stuff, and they're nice people and they're rational. So if it was really that bad, we surely would have changed the name, I assume. You know, it's like all of these codes all the time that are just sending to people it probably wasn't that bad. So I think just like, obviously this is just, you know, to people like me who have an opportunity to talk about things, obviously keep shouting as much as you can. But I think it's just like part of it is like there is so much out there that is undermining all of that good work, that is just making, you know, that is the stuff that people see all the time that sends a general vibe that the colonization of New Zealand wasn't that bad, and that the, you know, that don't worry about it and don't think about it. And I think just also really quickly, another thing that I think I learned from putting out a history web series and seeing the reaction to that, and I think it again goes back to something that Jade was saying about like having a clear utopian vision. I think like a lot of Pākehā viewers of our show had no concept of what that might be, or had never thought, oh, what might that look like? There's like a really, and including me, I think, going through that process as well of like, I think just like a really tiny thing from a comedy sketch, because that's what I do. There was like a comment someone made, just, you know, your normal kind of racist comment that was about the sketches that Captain Cook is pitching civilization to a panel of Māori investors, and then the Māori investors are like, oh, we've already got a civilization, so oh, no thank you. And one of the comments was just about, oh, you know, they're wearing contemporary like Pākehā clothes, so, you know, like, so what's that about, you know? And like obviously doesn't make any sense at all. But I think what it reveals as well is like this sense of no thought of like that, one, that there is a preferable alternate world where colonization didn't happen, and that Māori were able to just like continue living their lives and having their culture and developing and like exploring the world and developing their own trade relationships and, you know, all of the great things that have started to happen pre-colonization. And there's no sense of, oh, I wonder what, you know, the Māori relationship with the UN would have been, or how they would have handled the world wars, or like, you know, what tikanga would be around land now that might be a beacon to other countries. And there's no sense of that. Little comment about like they're wearing suits just kind of revealed to me this idea that like there's been no effort to imagine an alternative to just continuing to live in the society we live in now, that's been built by years of like oppressive and violent colonization. And I think just like, yeah, I mean, in terms of all of the work that everyone's doing, I think it's all connected in that the only way that I think a lot of people are going to be able to imagine that better alternative is if, you know, more people remove the obstacles to allow people to demonstrate that. And then it's our job as people in the media to then amplify those stories and put them out there so that people go, oh, that's what it looks like. I haven't had much time to imagine it, but that looks pretty good, and like more of that is probably good. So it's, yeah, it's all connected. It's like, yeah, it's all the multi-pronged stuff of a couple of people in positions of power just having courage and doing stuff that maybe, you know, the public might not be immediately on board with right now. And then we have examples that we can point to. And obviously there are already awesome examples, and I'll do my best to amplify those as well. Anyway, that was much even ramblier than Jade claimed hers was, so I apologize about that. But yeah, those are some of the things that I've learned and thought about from this process. So thank you for letting me talk and giving me time.
Kia ora, Robbie. Yeah, I've been making a few little notes with time tags. This is something I've learned through this process, is so that I can go back and see at specific times during the stream when people have just dropped little gems into the stream. So yeah, Tam, are we going to you now?
Yeah, well, Jackie's back, as we can all see, but I was thinking it could be cool to, because you were going really cool in a really cool direction. I'm thinking that might be a nice end note to finish the kōrero on. So I might go to Monique and then jump to you, Jackie, if that's all good. And Monique, I was thinking for your question, this is probably one that everyone will want to add on to as well. So that's pretty cool. So you, I said I signaled to this earlier, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your ideas about how the law, how can the law or we as society reconcile fundamental cultural misunderstandings, or not misunderstandings, but kind of like not translating about land ownership, and how can we learn more and do better?
These are really easy questions. This has actually been confronted by the Waitangi Tribunal quite a bit in the sort of legal framework. And their response almost uniformly is that we have a different paradigm here, and it stems from the treaty relationship. So there is something about these two systems that needs to kind of come together and find some way of reconciling it, developing maybe different systems of tenure, maybe different types of property rights. And we can actually see that sort of happening a wee bit in, for instance, the legislation that has provided for Te Urewera and the Whanganui River being their own legal entities. So there's some steps being taken, and but they're generally sort of steps of, in my view anyway, generally steps of a sort of Pākehā Western system trying to mould things it's used to around concepts that it's not used to, as opposed to actually really sort of stepping back and letting tikanga kind of be half of that partnership and half of our system of ownership, land law, whatever words you want to use. I mean, I think part of the problem really is that even this word ownership, like Robbie was saying, you know, we have these words and we have these concepts, but nobody really kind of challenges them that much. But the whole kind of concept of ownership is quite at odds with a tikanga Māori way of conceptualizing the way you work with land, the way you interact with land and develop relationships with land. So I think there's some sort of broader fundamental questions that need to be asked about what is it that we are actually building on here, because even the Pākehā system, like Thomas said earlier, was like, it's a feudal thing. It's from medieval times, and it's a social, political, and economic relationship that is completely irrelevant now, and it deserves, I think, hard questions because it doesn't, like a lot of the words don't really make any sense. The economic system is totally different, and we have clearly a very different cultural context too. So I actually think bigger questions need to be asked, and I think they get to the constitutional level. And you know, there's a lot of things that give you hope in that regard too. So I'll just list off a couple of them. First is Justice Williams, his concept of lex Aotearoa, which is the notion that there was a sort of first stage of law, which is Kupe's law, and then there was the English law that came in with colonization, and we're entering a phase, he argues, of lex Aotearoa, which is these two kind of merging and becoming conceptually equalized in a really meaningful way. And the second is the Waitangi Tribunal's ideas about reconciling, and particularly ownership interests in fresh water. So in that particular field, the common law just doesn't recognize interests like ownership of water. You just can't own water at common law. You can have rights to access it and use it, but you can't actually own the water. So the Waitangi Tribunal was faced with a claim that said, literally, these are the rights that Māori had in water. How are we going to recognise these? And the tribunal said, well, we have to go to at least ownership. So there's the potential for something else, something more. And that's interesting. Ooh, what's going on there? I feel like it is a constitutional question. I feel that, you know, that the underlying feudal idea that land comes from grants from the king, well, that's a constitutional framework. It's something that's really important to that whole system. And Moana Jackson has argued, obviously, that there's a really big shift that needs to be made if the tiriti is actually going to be reflected in our constitutional makeup. And I think with something as important and as special as land, that is something that we need to look at. And there are steps it's happening in small ways, and I like to think as a whakatauki of, and I can't remember the Māori words, I'm sorry, but we're all looking at this island that's just across the horizon. Like we can't see the island, but we're directed to it, and our journey is shaped by what we imagine the island can be. So, and I think this ties into what Pania was saying about the different prongs. We have big thinkers, we have people who are making the small steps along the way, and each of those count. And I'm optimistic, and I look forward to hearing more about some awesome steps along the way.
Kia ora, Monique. So I'm going to come back to you, Jackie. You were talking a little bit about the before the internet cut out there. You were talking a little bit about central government work in the COVID response vis-a-vis work from marae, hapu, iwi. You were talking about how can our rangatahi learn their mihi when their mountains are being quarried, and you were talking about the marae as the most untapped source of potential for advancement in our society and our economy. So back to you for a last word, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, aroha mai, struggle street on the internet, so to reconnect. Yeah, you know, actually, I think I'd leave it there and kind of build on this constitutional transformation, and also direct to Pans and perhaps Jade to finish off more so around, you know, what does this look like in terms of, you know, whether it's a marae level, you know, around hapuranga, tiratanga, what does that look like perhaps for you too, because you're more so connected and embedded within both your Kāinga, and, you know, perhaps some advice for everyone how we can contribute to that, not just on, you know, kāwanatanga, but for us and how we exercise our tūnoranga tiratanga.
Kia ora, Jackie. Does anybody else have any last words or remarks, want to jump in at this point before we'll wrap up?
I did want to briefly touch on, and thanks for chucking over the rākau, Jackie, is that, you know, we must continue to do the mahi that we are doing because it's important, obviously, and because ngā uri whakatipu, the next generations depend on it. And what we also need to do is look to collaborate, because often we're doing these things on our own. And, you know, it's always helpful to have someone there, you know, picking you up along the way, grabbing you coffees, whatever, having kōrero, you know, having people to throw ideas across the floor with to, you know, hash those out. I think, too, we need to celebrate the wins when we get the wins, and you know, take care of ourselves as well. I know these wahine on here, you know, especially wahine Māori, they struggle to say no a lot, and we're constantly taking on kaupapa more than what we can handle. So for those of you wahine watching who can resonate with those two women there, particularly Jade and Jack, you know, it's important to take time out as well to reflect, to relax, to rejuvenate. Another thing too, just briefly, you know, those wins, we must, you know, or even our failures, take the time to really reflect on those and talk, you know, think about what worked well and what didn't. Because, you know, like all of you, I think, have already mentioned, you know, it's, you know, the system often is against us, and it is too slow. And so we need to be smarter in the way that we work. So that's why it's important to look for ways to collaborate, support one another, and celebrate the wins. You know, I think about what the impact that Ihumātao has had on our nation. And I think, you know, this kaupapa and the people who stood for it, you know, puta noi te motu, you know, people gave up their jobs, people gave up uni for a semester to come here and sleep in winter in tents and, you know, under marquees and things like that. You know, their contribution is going to, you know, make a better Aotearoa. And when I think about some of those impacts, you know, this kaupapa has changed how developers, you know, large-scale developers will engage with Māori. And, you know, what, you know, the precedent that Ihumātao will set to will have an impact that, that, you know, will support our kaupapa, support our rangatiratanga and whatnot. But I would just like to end too on saying, you know, Māori mā, you know, e tū, you know, maranga ake, you know, we have our rangatiratanga, let's take back our mana motu hake, our Pākehā whānau, our Pākehā allies, come with us and tautoko and support, because what they say is good for Māori is good for all of Aotearoa. So, yeah, tautoko mai.
Tēnā koe, Pania. Any final words? Anyone want to jump in? That was potentially an extremely profound and good note to end on. So maybe I'm just scanning the Zoom horizon, but yeah, maybe that's a good note to end on. And so I'll just say thank you again to all of you for joining us this evening. As you said, Pania, it's like people who tend to come to these hui to speak with us tend to be extremely busy people and overcommitted people. So we really appreciate you coming on and taking on this kaupapa for this evening with us. And yeah, I mean, I just want to say one more thing before I introduce the panel for next week, and then hand back to Tam, who will close us off. I guess I'm thinking what you said, Jade, about the way in which, if we wanted to, we could provide for the return of all Department of Conservation land to Māori. And if we wanted to, we could provide for mechanisms to allow for the return of private property to Māori. And these are things that, you know, get dismissed, right? Or get seen as, you know, way too big to even start to think about. But how else are we going to get to this kind of justice unless we start to think about it and start to talk about it and start to spread the ideas? Because really, it shouldn't actually be that complicated if we want to do it, and we build that will amongst communities to do it. So I really just want to say thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to, as I do with all of these, go back and listen to them again and enjoy them. Okay, so for next week, we are going to be talking about transport and urban design, which is a super nerdy topic that I'm sure actually a lot of the people on this conversation would like to chip into as well. But we have a great lineup. So we've got Anthony Tonon, who is a musician and who is also an advocate for transport reform, and particularly rail, the return of intercity rail transport in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So he'll be joining us, and I think he might even play us a song or some music as part of that contribution, which will be the first time that's happened on Aotearoa Town Hall so far. We've also got Patrick Reynolds, who's a photographer and a urban designer, transport person, also on the board of NZTA. Sky Duncan, who's another transport planner and urban designer based in the US. Oliver Bruce, who runs the Micromobility podcast, and Chris Bishop, who's a member of Parliament for Hutt South and the National Party transport spokesperson. And we have Elisabetta Heta, who's an architect at Jazzmax and a very awesome person who we're super lucky to have on board as well. So that is next week, next Monday, 7 p.m. as well. Yeah, so thanks again for having us. Back to you, Tam.
Yeah, well, that's next week, but today is a special day. A very special day indeed. So I'm gonna just wait for everyone to unmute their microphones because I don't want to do this by myself. And this is for you, Mary. Thomas's mum is watching. She commented before and said, "Happy birthday, Thomas." So we thought Pania suggested we sing you a bit of a waiata on your special day. All right. Toru wha. Hari huri tae.
Perfect.
Hari
Hari
huri
huri
tae.
koe.
Hari
Hari Thomas.
Hari huri tae kia koe.
Hooray!
Hey.
Aroha, it's so hard singing on Zoom because everyone's like out of sync. Oh.
That's the best bit so far on the whole of the Aotearoa Town Hall series. I guess this is why people have been trying to do choir practice on Zoom have all been doing it while they're all on mute. But that was amazing. That will stay with me as one of the most cherished birthday moments of my life. So thank you very much.
Oh, cool. Oh, oh, cool. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, Thomas. A special day. Awesome. Hei, ngā mihi koutou, i ngā kai kōrero o te pō. Yeah, just awesome. So much to have an internal wānanga about over the next forever. So thank you all for giving up a part of your time to spread this information far and wide, and it's all part of a kaupapa of trying to encourage people to invest in themselves by investing in this knowledge and understanding, listening and learning, and thinking about our part in the part that each and every one of us play in Aotearoa. So I'm going to finish us off with a karakia, and that's us for another week. Week 7, awesome. Week 8 next week, so cool. And looking forward to that kōrero on transport and urban design. All right, me noi tātou. Unuhia wetewetea, ngā tāmitanga o te wā, ngā kaupehitanga o te wā, ngā hiringa o te wā. Kia wātia te ngākau, kia wātia te tinana, kia wātia te wairua. Tomokia e tāne, tāne te waiora, tāne te whakaputa nei, ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama, e rongo whakairia, tūturu whiti whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, ka kite whanau.
Ka kite.